So I want you to imagine inheriting this just massive, centuries-old corporate spreadsheet,
Right.
and it covers like half a continent. But the deeper you look into the rows and columns, you realize it is just entirely filled with hidden fees.
Oh, yeah.
Corrupt middle managers,
Mm.
missing inventory, and literal private armies on the payroll.
Which is a lot to deal with.
Yeah. Now, imagine your job is to audit this entire operation by hand without a computer.
Good luck with that.
Right. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We're jumping into this truly massive, historically dense, and just super revealing piece of paperwork. It's excerpts from the Fifth Report from the Select Committee as a House of Commons on the Affairs of the East India Company dated July 28, 1812.
Yeah, and, just to set the table for what we're doing today, we are looking at a foundational historical account of colonial management here. And as you'd expect, this 1812 document is filled with the colonial framing of its era. I mean, it frequently talks about, quote-unquote civilizing local populations,
Right.
pacifying freebooters, and ultimately extracting wealth. So our mission here is purely to report on what is written in this specific historical text.
Exactly.
We are not endorsing these imperial viewpoints or the administrative actions they describe. We're just unpacking the fascinating historical data, the administrative logic, and honestly, the sheer scale of the operation that's in the source material you provided.
Yeah. We're essentially looking at the mechanics of an empire's machine.
Yeah.
As written by the people who were, actively trying to build it.
Right.
And to understand what the East India Company was trying to build, you really have to look at the incredibly chaotic system they inherited.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they stepped into a world in South India where the entire economic structure just seemed designed to incentivize literally everyone to lie about the money.
Yeah, the report actually goes into immense detail about this. The system of revenue collection under the prior native governments.
Like the Mohammedan governments of the Nabob of the Carnatic, right?
Exactly, yeah. And even during the really early years of British rule, because the central government at the time, they did not collect taxes directly from the farmers.
Right.
Instead, they used this massive system of middle managers. They rented out huge tracts of land to individuals who are often called amildars, or head inhabitants.
So, okay, I want to pause on those middle managers for a second because the text makes it really clear. These were not like merit-based promotions.
Oh, not at all.
How did someone actually become an amildar?
Well, they bought the position.
Just flat out bought it.
Yep. The text notes that these posts were usually purchased by bribing officials at the seat of government.
Wow.
And, this created a deeply unstable dynamic because their job security was practically non-existent. And Amildar knew he could be removed at literally any moment if someone else just came along and offered a larger bribe.
So you have absolutely zero incentive to do a good job.
Exactly. Why make long-term investments in the land or the local infrastructure? The only logical move, from his perspective, was to just extract as much cash as humanly possible,
Right.
as quickly as possible from the riots.
And the riots being the actual frontline cultivators, right? Like the farmers who were physically out there working the soil.
Yeah, that is the crucial relationship here. The central prince expected a specific amount of revenue from the Amildar, and as long as that money arrived, the central authority generally just turned a blind eye to how it was collected.
Which is wild.
It created this cascading effect of corruption down the entire chain. The report explicitly states that everyone in this intermediate hierarchy prostituted the authority with which they were clothed to serve their own private views.
Okay, let's unpack this mechanism because this sounds exactly like a deeply broken modern corporate franchise model.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. You have regional managers who just send a flat, completely made-up franchise fee to headquarters. They pocket the massive difference they extort from the customers, and the poor frontline workers are the ones getting squeezed to death.
What's fascinating here is that the workers did have a coping mechanism, though.
Really? If you're a riot in this situation, how do you even survive that kind of pressure?
Well, you survive through what the text calls evasion and concealment.
Evasion and concealment.
Yeah. The riots were being squeezed so relentlessly that their only defense was to just hide the reality of their harvest.
Oh, so they just lied about what they grew?
Exactly. If you were a farmer, you might hide your crops, lie about what you were growing, or underreport your yield. Because if you produced an extra surplus through, hard work, the middle manager would simply confiscate it.
Which is entirely rational behavior. Why work harder if it just gets stolen?
Right.
But surely the government had some kind of oversight. I mean, you don't run an agrarian economy covering half a continent without accountants.
Oh, they had accountants. Every village had an accountant called a kernum. But if we look at the mechanics of the corruption, the system just absorbed them too.
Of course it did.
Yeah. The kernums quickly realized it was far more profitable, and honestly probably safer, to collude with the corrupt amaldars than to report the truth to some distant central government.
So they were cooking the books.
Big time.
Hmm.
The accountants helped conceal the true value of the lands. So the central government was operating with a massive blind spot. They
Right.
had literally no idea what the land was actually capable of producing or what was even happening to the people working it.
But if the central government is completely blind, how did the East India Company possibly think they could step in and audit a system where literally every single person, I mean, from the regional manager down to the village accountant, is financially incentivized to lie to them?
Well, in the beginning, they couldn't.
They just couldn't do it.
No. The report frankly admits that early on, the British simply kept this middle management system in place.
Really?
Yeah, because the alternative was just too complex to even contemplate. But eventually, the math caught up with them.
Right, because they wanted the money.
Exactly. They realized that if they wanted to actually secure the revenue and stop the widespread oppression of the cultivators, which, by the way, was ruining the region's economic potential, they had to shatter this black box.
So if the middle managers are a black box of fraud, the company is left with only one terrifying administrative option, right? They have to fire the middlemen and deal directly with the individual frontline workers.
Which brings us to a radical administrative shift detailed in the report. They called it the Riot War Settlement.
Okay, I want to dig deep into this because the logistics here just absolutely blow my mind. What is the actual mechanism of a riot war settlement?
The core concept of riot war is direct engagement. The government settles the rent directly with every individual riot or cultivator.
Wow.
Yeah, no middlemen, no amaldars taking a cut. And this direct taxation system was heavily pioneered by figures like Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Monroe in a region called the Ceded Districts.
I mean, I understand the theory, but I cannot get past the sheer logistics.
It's massive.
It's like a modern government deciding to stop taxing massive corporations, and instead, they're going to audit the individual tax returns of every single gig economy worker in the country by hand,
Yeah.
without a single computer. How do you physically execute that in the early 19th century without just collapsing under the paperwork?
Well, the report is very clear that it required an obsessive level of administration. It actually calls for an active, uniform, and unrelaxed exercise of superintendence.
Unrelaxed, I bet.
To make this work, the British collectors and their assistants had to physically survey all the land. They couldn't rely on the old, corrupt ledgers.
Because the ledgers were full of lies.
Exactly. So they had to walk the fields. They had to ascertain the real extent of cultivated land, categorize the soil type, document what kind of produce it yielded,
That is insane.
and even calculate what quantity of seed would yield certain produce per acre.
Wait, they were out there calculating seed yield ratios for millions of individual farmers.
Yep.
That is a staggering level of micromanagement.
It was a massive data collection effort. And based on this exhaustive physical survey, the government would set a maximum rent for each specific field.
Okay.
Once that was set, each cultivator was given a pata.
Let's define a pata for the listener. Is that essentially like a lease?
Yeah, it's a legally binding lease or contract. It was a physical document handed to the riots specifying exactly what land they held and the precise sum they engaged to pay for it.
So they finally knew what they owed.
Think about what this means if you're a farmer in that era. Before, you were subject to this random, devastating extortion based on the whim of a local middle manager.
Right.
Now, you hold a piece of paper that tells you exactly what you owe before you even put your oxen to the plow.
And according to the report, this actually created a massive incentive for the farmers to produce more
Oh, absolutely.
because the rent was capped at the maximum survey valuation.
Yeah.
So if you worked hard, employed extra labor, and just had a great harvest, you got to keep the entire surplus, right?
Mhm.
The government couldn't just randomly raise your rent because you had a good year.
And the protection worked in reverse as well.
Oh, like if there was a drought.
Yeah, if a bad season hit or the monsoon failed, the system was designed so the rent could be lowered to match the cultivator's actual ability to pay. It tied the government's revenue directly to the real-world conditions of the frontline worker.
But I keep coming back to the enforcement aspect here.
It's the tricky part.
Even with a contract, how do you police millions of individual farmers spread across a territory larger than Scotland? I mean, if a farmer says their crop failed, How does the collector know they aren't just reverting to the old trick of evasion and concealment?
Well, what the report reveals here is an incredibly cynical but undeniably effective piece of statecraft.
Okay.
The British couldn't be everywhere, so they weaponized the peasants' own neighborhood dynamics.
Wait, how exactly do you weaponize a neighborhood for tax auditing?
Well, the report explains that cultivators in adjoining villages knew each other's circumstances perfectly well.
Oh.
It's just the nature of agrarian communities, right? If one village managed to convince the British collector that their crops had failed.
And they successfully got their taxes lowered.
Exactly. The neighboring villages were immediately aware of it. And either from jealousy or hoping to establish a precedent to get their own taxes lowered, those neighbors were extremely ready to give information to the collectors.
Wow.
They would essentially inform on each other if someone was gaming the system.
So they weaponized neighborhood gossip to audit a continent?
Pretty much.
That is brilliant, in a very grim way.
Yeah,
And according to the numbers, it worked.
it really did.
The text notes that in the ceded districts under Thomas Monroe, the land revenue jumped from around 10 lakh to over 15 lakh star pagodas in just 7 years.
Yeah, huge jump.
Yeah, and just to translate that jargon for you listening, a lakh is 100,000, and a star pagoda was the standard gold coin of the era. So they took the revenue from roughly 1 million gold coins to over 1.5 million. That is a massive influx of hard currency for the company.
It was a transformative financial success for the administration. And, the report frames it as a social success, too, claiming the locals went from being lawless freebooters to satisfied, civilized subjects.
Right, the colonial framing.
Exactly. But the structural reality is that the company found a way to efficiently extract value by cutting out the middleman. However, applying this neat spreadsheet-style system to a whole continent runs into a massive problem when you move to a region that already has centuries of its own deeply entrenched paperwork.
Right, because this centralized direct-to-consumer riot war model hit an absolute brick wall when the company tried to roll it out in the western coastal provinces,
Yeah.
specifically Canara and Malabar.
Yeah, they encountered a legal landscape they were completely unprepared for.
How so?
Well, in Canara and Malabar, they didn't just find farmers working state land. They found a system of private property rights that the Select Committee report describes with genuine awe.
Really?
Yeah, the text actually states that the private property here was more ancient and probably more perfect than that of England.
See, this is a fascinating contradiction to me because usually when you think of a conquering empire, you picture them rolling in, planting a flag, erasing the local laws, and just dictating their own terms.
Right.
Why didn't an empire with a massive army just wipe the slate clean and declare all the land theirs?
Yeah.
Instead, the text describes them acting like some kind of archaic title insurance company,
Yes.
frantically digging through 14th century deeds just to figure out who owns a tiny plot of pepper vines.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, preserving these ancient rights was not driven by a passion for local heritage.
I figured.
It was an absolute administrative necessity for revenue collection. The riot war system requires taxing the legal owner of the land.
Okay.
If you arbitrarily destroy the ancient property rights, you destroy the social fabric and the recognized chain of ownership. A widespread rebellion over stolen land is far more expensive than hiring translators to read old deeds.
That makes total sense.
The company needed to know exactly who to send the tax bill to, which meant they had to understand the black books.
Oh, let's talk about these black books, because the text makes them sound like mythological artifacts. What actually were they?
So in Canara, landlords who were referred to as Nair Mul Guineas passed their land down through generations. And to track this, they used registers of land transfers that the British called black books.
Okay.
These were the physical, administrative memory of the culture. I mean, a single book could record transfers for over a century.
Wow.
And when a book physically wore out from age and handling, they would carefully make a fresh copy. They'd insert a memorandum on the title page noting the exact year the original was written.
Just incredible preservation.
They even distributed multiple copies among different branches of the family just to ensure the historical record survived fires or disputes.
That is a level of estate planning and redundancy that modern data centers would envy.
Seriously.
And if that wasn't complicated enough, the property rights in Malabar were even more convoluted,
Or
right?
vastly more complicated. Malabar operated on a system of property rights distinguished by the word jumnam, which signifies birthright.
Jumnam.
Yes. And within this jumnam system were incredibly complex, layered mortgage structures.
Yeah, I was reading the section on the Malabar mortgages, specifically a contract called an Audi.
Right. The Ati.
And I really need you to walk me through the mechanics of this because my head was spinning. From what I understand, an original owner pledges their land to a mortgagee.
Correct.
The mortgagee gets to take 2/3 of the agricultural produce as interest on the loan. But the original owner retains a tiny, almost microscopic fraction of an interest in the land. Not for money, but just to prove they are still the true owner.
That is exactly how the legal mechanism functioned.
That's wild.
The original owner retained that fractional interest specifically to preserve their right of redemption, the legal right to eventually buy the land back.
Okay.
And it gets even more intricate. If the original owner became desperate and needed more money, they could execute further deeds on that same land, selling off more and more of their rights.
So the slice of ownership just gets thinner and thinner?
Exactly. The text notes there are deeds where the remaining interest is so faint that the original owner is given nothing but a handful of rice or a measure of ghee by the tenant,
A handful of rice.
purely as an annual acknowledgement of his ancestral title.
Holding on to a legal title for generations in exchange for a handful of rice. The dedication to property law there is just astounding.
It really is.
But the tragedy of this section of the report is that the British were inheriting this complex web after it had been severely traumatized by previous rulers.
Yes. The report details the devastation caused by previous conquerors, specifically Hyder Ali and later Tipu Sultan of Mysore.
What did they do?
Well, according to the text, these rulers taxed the lands in Canara and Malabar so aggressively that they essentially destroyed the underlying property value.
Oh, man.
The financial exactions were so severe that proud landlords, rather than abandoning their ancestral estates, stayed on their lands to work them as mere laborers.
That's heartbreaking.
They were completely unable to subsist on the rent, yet they clung to the physical title of the land.
So the East India Company had to untangle this damaged, hyper-complex web of black books and fractional rice mortgages just to figure out who to apply the riot war tax to.
Yes.
It's corporate due diligence disguised as historical preservation.
Very well put.
But while paperwork and ancient deeds were the main hurdle on the Western coast, the auditors ran into a much more physical, violent obstacle in other regions.
Right. As we move to other territories described in the report, the primary obstacle to revenue collection wasn't village accountants or complex estate law. It was the presence of heavily armed, independent warlords known as the polygars.
Yeah, this section of the text reads like a sudden shift into a completely different genre. I mean, we go from nuanced property law to full-blown mob warfare. Who exactly were these polygars and how did they get so powerful?
So the report traces the origins of the polygars back to ancient times. It notes they were initially granted lands by Hindu governments.
Okay.
Their original purpose was to maintain local order and support the sovereign with armed forces when called upon.
Like local sheriffs.
Sort of, yeah. However, over centuries, particularly as central authority in the region weakened, these military chieftains usurped more and more power.
Got it.
By the time the East India Company arrived to audit the territory, many polygars had evolved into independent warlords, maintaining massive private armies of soldiers referred to in the text as peons.
And these private armies weren't just standing around in forts. They were actively running a brutal extortion ring across the countryside.
It's not regular.
The text describes a specific fee they collected called the Desha Kevel.
Right, the Desha cable. It translates roughly to a district watching fee.
Watching fee, yeah.
In theory, it was meant to be a payment for local police protection, but in reality, the report makes it unequivocally clear that this was not connected to any actual police work.
Shocker.
It was the price of forbearance. It was extortion money paid by a village just to stop the polygars' own peons from plundering them.
Let me put this in perspective for the listener. We are reading an 1812 parliamentary report that is essentially documenting the dismantling of a countrywide mafia operation.
That's exactly what it is.
The watching fee is a classic mob shakedown. It's the historical equivalent of saying, nice village you got here. It would be a real shame if my private army burned it down.
Yeah.
And the text is incredibly graphic about what happened if a village tried to resist this shakedown.
The mechanics of their extortion were terrifying. If a village refused to pay the deshakaval or simply couldn't afford it, the polygars resorted to horrific violence to make an example of them.
Jeez.
The report documents the use of torture and the whip. They employed a tactic called pounding cattle, which meant confiscating or harming the village's vital livestock.
That's devastating for a farming village.
They would take local inhabitants captive, drag them back to the polygars' lands, or in the worst cases, murder them. It was a localized reign of terror specifically designed to extract wealth.
Wealth that, from the perspective of the East India Company, rightfully belonged on their own balance sheets.
Exactly. Which brings us to the core administrative conflict. The East India Company, under the leadership of figures like Lord Cornwallis and Lord Hobart, recognized that a competing monopoly on violence was disastrous for business.
Oh, absolutely.
You cannot successfully implement a meticulous riot war tax system where you collect rent from individual farmers if a local warlord has already stolen the village's grain and kidnapped their accountant.
Right. So how did the British actually solve this? I imagine you can't just send a polite corporate memo to a warlord asking them to stop torturing the tax base.
No, they had to use overwhelming military force.
Okay.
The British administration made a calculated decision to completely break the military power of the polygars. The report details a systemic campaign of disarmament.
So they just went in and took their weapons.
When polygars resisted, the British deployed their own armies to subdue them, physically demolishing their forts and permanently annexing their lands.
And for the ones who surrendered.
The British essentially forced the mafia bosses to become standard, heavily monitored taxpayers. The text says their peshkush, which was their traditional tribute, was converted into a regular cash rent based on those same intense land surveys we talked about earlier.
So they put them on the spreadsheet?
Yep. And they explicitly fired the private armies. The report notes that the peons were freed from all obligations of military service and basically told to go back to being farmers.
So by forcibly disarming the warlords and disbanding their private armies, the company monopolized the use of violence in the region.
Exactly. And by monopolizing violence, they secured exclusive access to the region's economic output, funneling it directly into their own revenue streams.
It is truly staggering to step back and look at the sheer scale of the operation documented in this 1812 report.
It really is.
I mean, we started this deep dive looking at a deeply corrupt, decentralized chain of middle managers and regional princes who are pocketing bribes and hiding crop yields.
Right.
Then we saw the East India Company's massive, painstaking effort to bypass that corruption by walking the fields and individually auditing millions of frontline farmers through the riot war system.
And from there, we watched them attempt to impose that system on the western coast, only to be forced to adapt to centuries of complex black book ledgers and fractional mortgages in Malabar.
All just to identify the legal owners of the land they wish to tax.
Yes.
And finally, we saw them bringing down entrenched local warlords, suppressing private armies, and demolishing forts, just to ensure that the wealth of the countryside flowed to London rather than to a local chieftain. It's a massive, complex story of a corporation utilizing every tool at its disposal, from seed surveys to military sieges, to render a chaotic world legible.
Legibility really is the foundational concept here, because what the Fifth Report ultimately proves is a timeless administrative reality. An organization, whether it is an 1812 colonial corporation, a historical empire, or a modern state, cannot control, cannot manage, and certainly cannot profit from a system that it cannot accurately measure.
And that brings up a really fascinating question for you listening to this right now. The East India Company went to agonizing, unprecedented lengths. I mean, surveying every field by foot, interviewing millions of farmers, decoding archaic 14th century deeds, and fighting literal wars.
Right.
All just to measure and extract the maximum possible value from physical land. Well, to think about the vast digital territories we all inhabit today, our search data, our shopping habits, our private online lives, what kind of invisible riot war surveys are modern tech monopolies quietly conducting on your digital footprint?
That's a scary thought.
They certainly don't need armies of peons, and they don't use handwritten black books. But they are absolutely surveying your territory, measuring every yield, and trying to extract their own maximum value. It really makes you wonder who holds the pata to your digital life, something to mull over the next time you blindly click accept on a massive terms of service agreement.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.